Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished participants in the World Government Summit and the Global Health Forum, I'm really honored to be here today. And again, if you don't know American Forests, we're the oldest forest conservation organization in America, founded in 1875. But don't let our name deceive you. We're a global organization, and I am so grateful to be here today to speak with you about a real global urgency. And what I'm excited about in today's forum is I feel like we're building on ideas here. We're adding layers of understanding to the urgency of getting this right, integrating nature and innovative design for urban health. From the very first panel, we've heard a calling for health, not health care, for a vision of health 3.0, for going beyond the boundaries of just treating clinical conditions to a culture of wellness. And that's exactly what I want to speak about today. But particularly what I want to get at in my remarks is how we drill that down to specific applications for specific health challenges. So what we're going to need to do is what I'm going to describe here over and over again for the key drivers that are impacting health in urban areas today. And so I'm going to focus exclusively on how do we apply nature and innovative design to the threat of extreme heat. And particularly extreme heat fueled by climate change that's not only impacting famously hot cities like Phoenix, Arizona that you see here, which set a new record for heat-related deaths this past year. But also places like the UK, places that are famously cold that are suddenly dealing with heat in ways that they never have before, and in some cases are not as well prepared as places like Phoenix that have been dealing with heat for a long time. So I want us to really get into, so how do we solve for the public health threats of extreme heat in our cities? And first, it starts with understanding the threat itself. Extreme heat is an intersectional threat to public health that uniquely preys upon the most vulnerable among us. Boy, that sounds like it echoes with themes that we've heard here today, right? And so building heat-resilient cities is a critical antidote to this public health threat. Well, let's just start with a couple of key numbers. Just in this century alone, we've already seen a near doubling of the heat wave days that we're facing around the world. And that's already increasing heat-related deaths, as I described earlier, particularly among vulnerable populations like seniors. Here's a statistic just recently published in The Lancet. We're projected to have a 370% increase in heat-related deaths among seniors by the middle of this century. And look, we're not going to air condition our way out of this crisis. Let me be clear. Only 33% of homes around the world, according to the IEA, have air conditioning. And that's even despite a recent run-up that we've had in air conditioning. And I'll also describe in a bit how air conditioning has some unique inequities built into it and also actually can make the crisis of extreme heat worse. Well, first, I want to start with a particularly important intersectionality of the heat threat in our cities today. And it's the connection between heat and air pollution. Heat cooks air pollution. And if you imagine the neighborhoods in our cities that are already facing a higher burden of heat due to structural differences that I'll talk about a bit more later, those are the same neighborhoods that traditionally have higher levels of air pollution. And so here it is, you imagine these neighborhoods with our most health vulnerable people who are facing on the hottest days a combined stress of extreme heat and elevated air pollution. That's how, for example, in Chicago, a city in my country, over 700 people died in 3 days of the combined impacts of extreme heat and air pollution. But it's not just in those extreme moments. The reality is this grinding impact of extra heat in the most vulnerable neighborhoods and elevated air pollution has led to chronic conditions, increased respiratory illness, so that a city like Detroit, Michigan, in my country, has a nearly 50% higher rate of asthma than the surrounding cities in Michigan because of its structural inequities around heat and air pollution. But I really appreciated some remarks on the panel earlier today about the role of physical activity and the way the heat impedes physical activity, because that is a great example of the ripple effects of extreme heat out through all sorts of other impacts on our health and our well-being. So whether you're a senior who needs to get your steps in during the day, or whether you're a fit athlete wanting to pursue your training, a remarkable statistic, we've already this century seen a 20% increase in the number of days where heat poses a threat to even moderate outdoor exercise. That's projected to increase another 40% again by the middle of this century. So as I'll get into in more detail later, if we can't design safe outdoor spaces for people to walk and recreate and use public transit 12 months a year, we're creating a barrier to good health in our cities. Well, I said that we can't air condition our way out of this crisis, and I want to talk about a couple of the barriers to using air conditioning. It is part of the solution, but I want to talk about a couple of the challenges. And one is that not all air conditioning is created equal. If you have a window unit like you see there on one side of the screen, that doesn't have nearly the power as a central air conditioning unit. And often lower income people who have that less efficient kind of air conditioning struggle to pay to run it at full tilt to keep their houses cool. A recent study in my country showed 25% of low-income people have struggled to pay their energy bill at some point within the last year. So it's not just a question of do you have air conditioning, but is your air conditioning sufficient to keep your home cool, and can you actually afford to run it enough? And then there's the reality that air conditioning is literally making it hotter outside in two ways. First of all, air conditioning, if you're not aware, it's actually taking the heat from the inside and it's putting it on the outside. And there was one study that found that when you combine that at a citywide scale, you can raise the temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius just from all that waste heat that's coming out of our air conditioners. So there's a cost to air conditioning in terms of this heat in our environment. Well, there's also a cost in terms of fueling climate change. Right now, 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from air conditioning. And there are projections that that could as much as triple by the middle of this century as we have more extreme heat days and there's more demand for air conditioning. So we urgently need to figure out how to balance our need to expand air conditioning with these real challenges of the impacts that it has on making the problem worse. So here's the solution. It's designing and building heat-resilient cities. And there are three key attributes, or three elements to this approach. The first is heat-resilient buildings. The second is clean air conditioning. And the third is nature-based cooling. And that's where I'm going to focus most of the rest of my time, because I bet the nature-based cooling side of this is not something that you maybe been tracking on quite as much. Well, it's great that we're here in Dubai talking about heat-resilient buildings, because some of the greatest technologies for creating passive cooling in building have been innovated here in this part of the world. And in fact, you can see here in Dubai. So whether it's towers like these that capture cool breezes and bring them into buildings and allow hot air to pass out, whether it's modern interpretations of ancient techniques to shield buildings from the heat, or whether it's indoor-outdoor spaces that allow breezes and natural light to come through and create spaces that are more functional on hot days. This, I'm happy to say, is a new airport design in my country, copycatting some of the great design ideas from this part of the world. So we really need to lean into these kinds of strategies to make the structures that we're trying to cool inherently easier to cool. But we are going to need more air conditioning, and one of the key things that we need to do is make that air conditioning more efficient. I'm really pleased to say that as part of the Global Cooling Pledge that was signed here in Dubai as part of COP28, there was a goal to reduce the energy intensity of air conditioning, new air conditioning, by 50%. And we have good research that says we can do that with available technologies and a full push on deployment. So that does have to be part of the equation. But I want to spend most of the rest of my time now really talking about the other missing element here, which is nature's air conditioning. And just look at this thermal image on the left. This is quite incredible that, a tree is in fact nature's air conditioner. It's one of the most remarkable cooling devices ever invented, if you will. And it can cool the environment, a tree, by more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit through a combination of shade and the process of evapotranspiration, which is a natural form of cooling that trees create when they exchange moisture with their surrounding environment. And so we need to deploy this natural cooling as broadly as we can throughout our cities, whether it's homes without air conditioning, where this might be the only form of cooling that they have, or whether it's homes that do have air conditioning. We've got great research showing that we can reduce the air conditioning load in a house by nearly half with optimal deployment of trees. And of course, trees are also carbon negative cooling, and they're reducing energy use for air conditioning, but they're also sequestering carbon dioxide. So it's really a two-way solution for climate change. And in case that wasn't enough, remember I talked about the intersection of heat and air pollution. And the other thing that trees do very, very well is to deflect and absorb air pollution. And there's a great study in the US that shows that the absorption of pollution by trees in our country reduce incidences of respiratory illness by 670,000 per year. So really powerful benefits for public health from air pollution from the use of trees. So this two-way solution, you'd say, well, my gosh, we ought to be deploying this as rapidly as we can in the neighborhoods that need it the most, the low-income neighborhoods where people are most at risk. But in fact, it's quite the reverse. A map of trees in any city in America, and in fact, any city around the world, is also a map of income. And it means that the people who need trees the most for these benefits are getting them the least. And here's some statistics. In my country, the neighborhoods with the highest percentage of people in poverty have 26% less tree cover. Those neighborhoods are on average 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. There was a study after the 2015 heat waves in Europe that found that if we just doubled tree cover and put it in the places that we needed it the most, we could have reduced heat deaths by 40%. That's thousands of lives that we could have saved just with trees alone. And so here's some granular evidence. Those statistics that I gave you from the United States, it came from a study that my organization did, a tool my organization created called Tree Equity Score. And you have permission to multitask and look it up. It's treeequityscore.org, and you can see this free and available on the internet. We mapped every urban neighborhood in America, showing where we have trees and where we don't, and correlating that with where people are most at risk. So I've zoomed into Detroit, Michigan, into a neighborhood that I know well, where as you can see, it has about 1/4 of the amount of tree cover that you should find in a neighborhood like this. 45% people in poverty, 38% children and seniors, a high health burden index as measured by the CDC, and a heat disparity of 18.2 degrees hotter than the citywide average in Detroit on the hottest days. So 92 becomes 110. That's a life-threatening difference for people who are most at risk. So in closing, I want to say we need to transform our cities by using a data-driven, technically innovative, and intersectional approach. It's not going to be enough just to throw trees out on the landscape or use other heat-related interventions willy-nilly. We need to integrate them and deploy them scientifically and strategically. So for example, not all trees are created equal. My organization partnered with the US Forest Service to create a guidebook that assesses every single tree a city might plant on its climate benefits and its health benefits. And now we have cities across the country that are using this to make their tree decisions. We have cities like Phoenix, Arizona, which not only committed to tree equity in every neighborhood by 2030, and that's, by the way, in the fastest growing city in America making that commitment, but they said to get that functionality that we talked about earlier, places where people can walk and bike and move about the landscape safely on the hottest days, we need to actually align trees with those key corridors. And so Phoenix mapped out, as you can see there, a network of 100 cool corridors in those low tree neighborhoods so that as we pursue tree equity, we can align them with places like here you see in the Levine neighborhood of South Phoenix, a sidewalk here that connects a high school, a library, and a park, and a heavily used bus stop. Just the kind of functional coverage and shading that we need for our cities to be healthy and active. And we all understand, I think, that poverty itself is actually a health stress in so many different ways. And so one of the things that we have an opportunity to do is, as we're making this investment in our communities, to turn it into economic opportunities for people in these low-income neighborhoods that have these high health vulnerabilities. My organization did a study finding that we could create 25.7 jobs for every $1 million that we invest in the work of planting and caring for trees. And so one of the things that we've done is to create workforce programs to help people in these neighborhoods get the training and the wraparound services that they need to enter these careers and be successful in them. Well, speaking of investment, I'm really proud that in the United States, based on the kind of data-driven case of the connection of trees to public health that I made here today, we were able to secure an investment of $1.5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, led by the man in the middle that you see there. That's the U.S. Senator Cory Booker, himself a former mayor, who made the case to his fellow members of Congress that trees aren't $1 million investment in our cities. They're $1 billion investment that will save lives. And so this money is now being deployed all across America as grants to cities and frontline organizations to go out and do the work of planting and caring for trees. And President Joe Biden was a critical partner in getting this done as well. So here's my closing call to action for you. I apologize, I've used a lot of examples from the United States, but we need a global tree equity movement. We need a global movement to create heat-resilient cities by integrating those innovative design features that I mentioned with tree equity. And I'm showing you here a picture from the Lowfield Primary School in Sheffield, England. And during COP28, I'm proud to say we launched a tree equity score for the UK, just like the one I showed you for the United States, mapping tree inequities in every neighborhood in the UK and showing where we need to make these investments for public health. And this is a very low-income school that has real problems with air pollution on the school grounds. And so it was one of the places that we did launch plantings, synonymous with, simultaneous with putting out the tree equity score for the UK. And I just wish you could hear the students read you the poem that they wrote about what it meant to them to be planting healthy air on their school grounds. This is the kind of human stories that are out there that we need to capture and we need to make real by making this investment together. So my final call to action, we have leaders here from the health community, and there are really important ways in which you can help make this happen. The Center for Sustainable Healthcare is one of our partners in the UK. And they've been out doing planting projects in their communities and on National Health Services ground and other ways of advancing health equity through nature-based investments. And so I call on health leaders to think about what are the ways that you can, through your community investments and programs, elevate the kinds of heat resilience activities that I've talked about here today, but also add your voices to give credibility to the interventions that I've talked about. I think often healthcare and these kinds of preventative interventions have been seen as separate, and so there's an opportunity, I think, for you to help people see them as integrated and unified in a culture of health. Well, we have world leaders here too, and whether it's the kind of national level investment that I've described that we're making in the United States, whether it's housing policy, or whether it's joining the Global Cooling Pledge that was signed at COP28, and I'm proud to say that my organization signed that cooling pledge as well. You know, we all have opportunities through public policy to make these kinds of interventions possible, and in particular, I'm viewing the Global Cooling Pledge as an incredible platform for shared learning and collaboration on these issues. Well, corporate leaders have a critical role to play, and I just want to say it's been exciting to see corporations like American Express and Salesforce and Microsoft and Nespresso and Google, which was a partner in creating the Tree Equity Score that I mentioned, step up and provide their superpowers to this effort, whether it's technology, finance, volunteers. Really, there's a role for every type of corporate entity to step in and find a place in doing this work. And then lastly, I want to offer my organization as a partner. I traveled back here to Dubai just a couple months after COP28 because we see a global movement rising for this work of creating heat-resilient communities and particularly for this newcomer piece of the puzzle of creating tree equity in our cities to complement what we can do with interventions in the built environment. And so we're eager to help other countries follow some of the approaches that I've described here, whether it's creating a tree equity score or using some of the technically sophisticated approaches that I've described, like creating cool corridors. I think there's a real opportunity for us to create a global learning community and to advance this work much faster. So there's my contact information, and please, I hope that folks will reach out to me afterwards and we can find ways to do this together. Thanks so much.